Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she walked into the gun range for the first time. The smell of gunpowder filled her nostrils, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the concrete building. At 22 years old, she had never held a rifle in her life, but something deep inside her had always been curious about shooting. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah was surrounded by hunting culture, but her family was different. Her mother was a librarian who believed in books over bullets, and her father was a gentle mechanic who preferred fixing things to breaking them. While her classmates spent weekends at deer camps with their fathers, Sarah spent hers reading novels and helping her mother organize community book drives. The decision to visit the gun range came after a conversation with her older brother, who had just returned from his first deployment with the Marines. He had been sharing stories about his training at Island, talking about marksmanship and discipline. Sarah listened with growing interest, not because she wanted to join the military, but because she was fascinated by the precision and focus required for accurate shooting. "You should try it sometime," had said, noticing her curiosity. "There's more to it than people think. It's like meditation with purpose." So here she was, standing nervously at the counter of Lone Star Shooting Range, asking about beginner lessons. The man behind the counter, a grizzled veteran named Joe, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. Sarah was barely 5 feet tall, with delicate hands that looked more suited to turning pages than handling firearms. "You sure about this, little lady?" Joe asked, his tone condescending. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable with our ladies' self-defense class. We use pepper spray and whistles." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. "I'd like to learn rifle shooting, please." Joe shrugged and handed her a waiver to sign. "Your funeral. We'll start you with a .22 rifle. It's got the least kick." The first lesson was a disaster. Sarah's instructor, a retired Army sergeant named Bill, seemed more interested in impressing the other male shooters than actually teaching her. He spent most of the hour explaining gun mechanics in overly technical terms, barely giving her time to actually practice shooting. When she finally got to fire the rifle, her first shot missed the target completely. The second shot hit the very edge of the paper. By the third shot, she was shaking so badly from nerves that she couldn't even see the target clearly through the scope. "Maybe this isn't for you," Bill said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Some people just don't have the natural ability." The other shooters at the range began to take notice. Sarah could hear whispered comments and barely contained laughter. One man, wearing a military-style cap, walked over to examine her target. "10 shots and only 2 hit paper," he announced to his buddies, "and barely at that." Sarah wanted to disappear. She had never been publicly humiliated like this before. Her hands trembled as she set down the rifle, and she could feel tears threatening to fall. But something stubborn inside her refused to give up. "I'd like to book another lesson," she told Joe at the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Maybe archery would be more your speed." "Another rifle lesson," Sarah insisted. Over the next few weeks, Sarah returned to the range religiously. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she would drive the 30 minutes from her apartment to practice. Each time, she faced the same skeptical looks and condescending comments. The regular shooters began to know her as the girl who can't hit anything. Her improvement was painfully slow. After 2 weeks, she was consistently hitting the paper target, but her groupings were scattered across the entire surface. Other shooters would glance at her target and shake their heads in amusement. Some would offer unsolicited advice that usually began with, "Maybe you should try." The worst incident happened during her 3rd week. Sarah was practicing with a slightly larger caliber rifle when a group of off-duty police officers arrived for their regular training session. They set up at the lanes next to her, and she could overhear their conversation. "Look at that grouping," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Looks like someone threw confetti at the target." "Probably safer for everyone if she stuck to video games," another added, causing the group to laugh. Sarah's face burned with shame, but she continued shooting. She had spent her grocery money on these lessons, and she wasn't going to waste them. Something about the precision required for good shooting called to her, even though she was clearly struggling to achieve it. Her breakthrough came in an unexpected way. During her 4th week, Sarah arrived at the range to find it nearly empty except for an elderly man named Frank who came in every day at the same time. Frank had been watching her struggle for weeks without comment, but that day he approached her lane. "Mind if I share some advice?" he asked quietly. Sarah expected another condescending lecture, but Frank's approach was different. He was a retired shooting instructor who had taught Olympic competitors. Instead of focusing on her mechanical failures, he helped her understand the mental aspects of marksmanship. "Shooting isn't about strength or natural talent," Frank explained. "It's about consistency, breathing, and mental discipline. You're trying too hard to force the shot instead of letting it happen naturally." Frank spent the next hour teaching Sarah proper breathing techniques and how to find her natural point of aim. He showed her how to relax her grip and let the rifle settle into a comfortable position rather than fighting it. For the first time, Sarah began to understand what it meant about meditation. When she followed Frank's guidance, the noise and distractions of the range seemed to fade away. Her world narrowed down to her breathing, the crosshairs, and the target. Her first good shot surprised everyone, including herself. The bullet struck within the A-ring of the target, closer to center than she had ever achieved. Frank smiled and nodded encouragingly. "Now you're getting it. Don't think about the last shot or the next one, just this shot right now." By the end of that session, Sarah was consistently hitting within the 7 and 8 rings. It wasn't competition-level shooting, but it was respectable for a beginner. More importantly, she felt something click into place mentally. The focusing technique Frank taught her seemed to quiet all the doubts and distractions that usually filled her mind. The regular shooters began to take notice of her improvement, though their comments remained dismissive. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day," she overheard one man say when she managed a particularly good group. But Sarah no longer cared about their opinions. She had found something that challenged her in a way nothing else ever had. The precision required for good shooting demanded complete mental focus and physical discipline. Every shot was a test of her ability to control her breathing, her heartbeat, and her thoughts. Frank continued to mentor her, usually staying after his own practice to offer guidance. He taught her about different shooting positions, how to read wind conditions, and the importance of follow-through. Most importantly, he helped her develop confidence in her abilities. "The rifle doesn't know you're a small woman," Frank told her one evening. "Physics doesn't care about stereotypes. If you do everything correctly, the bullet will go where you aim it." As weeks turned into months, Sarah's shooting continued to improve steadily. She upgraded from the beginner .22 rifle to larger calibers, learning how to manage recoil and adjust for different ballistic characteristics. Her targets began showing tight, consistent groupings that impressed even the skeptical regulars. The transformation wasn't just in her shooting ability. Sarah found that the mental discipline required for marksmanship was improving other areas of her life as well. Her job performance at the insurance company where she worked began to improve dramatically. The same focus and attention to detail that made her a better shooter also made her better at analyzing complex policy claims. Her family noticed the change too. Sarah seemed more confident and self-assured than ever before. When came home for leave, he was amazed at her progress. "I can't believe this is the same person who used to be afraid of firecrackers," he said after watching her shoot a perfect score on a standard target. But the real test was coming. Mentioned that his Marine unit was planning a friendly shooting competition with local law enforcement and civilian shooters. It was an annual event designed to build community relations, and they needed more participants. "You should enter," suggested. "You're good enough now." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nerves. Competing against Marines and police officers seemed impossible. These were people who shot professionally, who had trained extensively in marksmanship. What business did a small-town insurance adjuster have competing against them? But Frank encouraged her to enter. "You've got natural ability that you've finally learned to harness," he said, "and you've got something most of those guys don't have." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "You've had to prove yourself every single day. They take their skills for granted. You've earned every bit of improvement through pure determination." The competition was still 2 months away, but Sarah decided to enter. She had no illusions about winning, but she wanted to test herself against serious competition. It would be a chance to see how far she had really come from that first embarrassing day at the range. As word spread about her entry in the competition, the reactions were predictable. Most of the regular shooters at her range were amused by her audacity. Some offered condescending encouragement, telling her it would be good experience and that she shouldn't feel bad about losing. But Sarah was no longer the same nervous beginner who had walked into the range months ago. She had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. Under pressure, with everyone watching and expecting her to fail, she had found a way to quiet her mind and focus completely on the task at hand. The competition would determine whether that newfound skill was real or just an illusion created by the supportive environment Frank had helped create. Sarah was about to face the biggest test of her shooting career, and her biggest challenge to the assumptions everyone had made about her abilities. Every evening after work, she practiced with renewed intensity. Frank helped her prepare for the specific challenges of competitive shooting, including dealing with time pressure and crowds of spectators. He taught her visualization techniques and helped her develop pre-shot routines that would keep her calm under pressure. "Remember," Frank told her during one of their last practice sessions before the competition, "shooting is 90% mental. You've got the physical skills now. The question is whether you can control your mind when everyone's watching and the pressure is on." Sarah nodded, knowing that everything she had learned over the past months was about to be put to the ultimate test. She had started this journey as a curious beginner who couldn't hit the broad side of a barn. Now, she was preparing to compete against some of the best marksmen in the region. The journey had been longer and more difficult than she ever imagined, but it had also been more rewarding. Regardless of how the competition went, Sarah knew she had already won something more valuable than any trophy. She had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed and developed a confidence that extended far beyond the shooting range. The competition was just 5 days away, and Sarah could feel the familiar butterflies in her stomach. But this time, instead of the paralyzing nervousness she used to feel, the anticipation was mixed with excitement. She had worked too hard and come too far to let fear hold her back now. The morning of the competition arrived with an unseasonably cool breeze that made Sarah shiver as she loaded her rifle case into her car. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing through all the shooting fundamentals Frank had taught her. Breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, follow-through. The words repeated in her head like a mantra. The competition was being held at camp, a military training facility about an hour from her town. As Sarah drove through the gates, she was struck by the professional atmosphere. This wasn't the casual environment of her local shooting range. Marines in dress blues were directing traffic, and temporary bleachers had been set up for spectators. Sarah's stomach tightened when she saw the other competitors arriving. They looked exactly like what she expected. Confident men in tactical gear, carrying expensive rifle cases and discussing equipment modifications in technical jargon she barely understood. Many wore military or law enforcement uniforms, their bearing radiating the kind of professional competence that comes from years of training. At the registration table, a young Marine corporal looked surprised when Sarah approached. "Are you here for the family activities?" he asked, glancing around for children. "I'm here for the shooting competition," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The corporal double-checked his list. "Sarah Martinez, you're registered for the precision rifle event." "That's right." He handed her a competitor number and a schedule. "Good luck, ma'am. The range safety briefing starts in 20 minutes. As Sarah walked toward the competitor area, she could feel eyes following her. Conversations seemed to pause as she passed, then resume in hushed tones. She caught fragments of comments that made her cheeks burn. "It must be someone's wife. Probably just here for the participation trophy. Hope she doesn't embarrass herself too badly." Sarah found a quiet spot to set up her equipment and tried to ignore the attention. She methodically unpacked her rifle, the same one she had been practicing with for months. It wasn't the most expensive or advanced weapon on the line, but Frank had taught her that consistency mattered more than equipment. "Well, look what we have here." Sarah turned to see 3 men approaching her position. They wore matching shirts from a local gun club, and their confident swagger suggested they were regular competitors. The leader, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, was smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Dave Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "President of the Lone Star Precision Shooters. Haven't seen you at any of our matches." "This is my first competition," Sarah admitted. Dave's smile widened. "First competition, and you're jumping straight into the precision rifle event. That's ambitious." His two companions chuckled. One of them, a tall man with sunglasses, shook his head. Precision rifle isn't like target shooting at the county fair, sweetheart. These ranges go out to 600 yards. The wind conditions alone will eat you alive if you don't know what you're doing. I appreciate the concern, Sarah said, trying to maintain her composure. But I've been preparing for months. Months? Dave laughed outright. Honey, I've been shooting competitively for 20 years. Some of these Marines have been training since they could hold a rifle. You might want to consider switching to the shorter range events. Less chance of disappointment. Sarah felt her face flush, but before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. Is there a problem here? Sarah turned to see approaching in his dress blue uniform, his expression stern. The three men from the gun club suddenly straightened up. No problem at all, Marine, Dave said quickly. Just offering some friendly advice to the new competitor. His eyes narrowed, the kind of advice that suggests she doesn't belong here. Now, I didn't say that, Dave backpedaled. Just that the precision rifle event is pretty challenging for a beginner. My sister has been training hard for this competition, said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a non-commissioned officer. I suggest you focus on your own preparation and let her focus on hers. The three men exchanged glances and decided to retreat. Well, good luck to you, miss, Dave said with forced politeness. Hope it works out. As they walked away, Sarah could hear one of them mutter, Marine's sister or not, reality is going to hit hard when she starts missing targets at 600 yards. Turned to Sarah with a concerned expression. You okay? I know those guys can be intimidating. I'm fine, Sarah said, though her hands were shaking slightly. Just nervous. Good, replied, surprising her. Nervous means you care. Nervous means you're taking this seriously. Use that energy. The range safety briefing began shortly after, with a Marine range master explaining the course of fire. The competition would consist of 3 stages, each testing different aspects of marksmanship skill. The first stage was precision shooting at 200 yards from a supported prone position. The second stage extended the range to 400 yards with time pressure added. The final stage was 600 yards with wind conditions and limited preparation time. Sarah felt her confidence wavering as the range master described the challenges. In practice, she had shot well at 200 and 300 yards, but 600 yards was beyond anything she had attempted. Frank had always said she would be ready when the time came, but sitting here surrounded by experienced competitors, his confidence seemed overly optimistic. The competitors were divided into 3 groups, with Sarah assigned to the second relay. This meant she would have to watch the first group shoot while fighting her nerves, but it also gave her a chance to observe the conditions and see how others performed. The first relay included several Marines from S unit and a mix of law enforcement officers and civilian competitors. Sarah watched in awe as they took their positions with military precision. Their movements were economical and confident, each shooter settling into their stance like they had done it thousands of times before. The 200-yard stage began, and Sarah could see the targets through binoculars provided for spectators. The first group's performance was impressive. Most shooters were placing all 10 shots within the 9 and 10 rings of the target. The Marines in particular seemed to be shooting almost perfect scores. Intimidating, isn't it? A voice beside her said. Sarah turned to see an older woman in civilian clothes watching the competition. She appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and keen eyes that missed nothing. A little, Sarah admitted. I'm starting to wonder what I got myself into. The woman smiled. I'm Dr. Jennifer. I coach the university shooting team and I've been watching competitive shooting for 30 years. Can I offer you some perspective? Sarah nodded gratefully. Those first relay shooters look impressive, but they're shooting in perfect conditions. No wind, good lighting, and they've had time to get comfortable. Watch what happens when conditions change or time pressure gets added. As if to prove her point, a gust of wind swept across the range, just as the second shooter in the first relay was taking his shot. Sarah could see through the binoculars that his bullet hit several inches left of center. Precision shooting isn't just about technical skill, Doctor continued. It's about adaptation and mental toughness. Sometimes the person who looks least prepared ends up surprising everyone. When the first relay finished, Sarah was both encouraged and intimidated by the scores. The top Marine had shot a 98 out of 100 at 200 yards, with most competitors scoring in the high 80s and 90s. But several had struggled with the windy conditions, and one experienced civilian shooter had suffered what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown, scoring only 72. "Second relay, take your positions," the range master called. Sarah's heart began racing as she gathered her equipment and walked to the firing line. She found her assigned lane and began setting up her rifle. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she had to concentrate to keep her movements smooth and deliberate. The competitor to her right was a police officer named who had been shooting competitively for 10 years. He noticed her nervousness and offered what he probably thought was encouragement. "Don't worry about the score," he said. "Just try to hit the target. First-time jitters can be brutal." To her left was a Marine Staff Sergeant named Tors who had introduced her to earlier. Unlike Tors said nothing, but Sarah could feel his professional assessment as he watched her preparation routine. "Relay 2, you have 10 minutes for preparation and sighting shots," the range master announced. Sarah forced herself to go through the pre-shot routine Frank had drilled into her hundreds of times. She adjusted her rifle rest, checked her scope settings, and took several practice shots at the sighting target. Her first shot hit high and right, but she made the necessary adjustments, and her second shot was nearly centered. "Not bad," Tors said quietly. "Your fundamentals look solid." The 10 minutes passed quickly, and Sarah found herself settling into the familiar rhythm of shooting. The noise from the spectators seemed to fade as she focused on her breathing and sight picture. "Relay 2, begin the first stage of fire. You have 15 minutes to complete 10 shots for record." Sarah's first shot felt good as she squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she could see it had hit in the 9 ring just slightly right of center. It wasn't perfect, but it was a solid start. Her second shot was better, landing in the 10 ring near the X ring that marked perfect center. Sarah felt a familiar calm settling over her as she went through her shooting routine. Breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. Breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. By her 5th shot, Sarah realized she was shooting better than she ever had in practice. The pressure that should have been overwhelming was actually helping her focus. Every distraction seemed to fade away except for the crosshairs and the target. "Outstanding shooting in lane 12, she heard someone say over the loudspeaker. Sarah realized with surprise that she was in lane 12. The range officers were tracking her performance, and apparently it was worth commenting on. She finished her 10 shots with 8 landing in the 10 ring and 2 in the 9 ring. As she waited for the targets to be scored, she could see other competitors glancing in her direction with expressions of surprise. When the scores were announced, Sarah had shot a 96 out of 100, placing her second overall for the stage behind only Staff Sergeant Tors, who had managed a 97. The police officer had shot an 89, and several other experienced competitors had scored lower than Sarah. The spectator area buzzed with surprise. Sarah could hear fragments of conversation as people tried to figure out who she was and where she had come from. "I never heard of her before. A beginner's luck. Wait until the pressure really starts." But Doctor found Sarah during the break between stages and offered genuine congratulations. "That was excellent shooting under pressure. You've clearly put in the work." Beamed with pride as he approached. "I knew you had it in you. But Sarah, that second stage is going to be harder. The 400-yard range has tricky wind patterns, and they're adding time pressure." Sarah nodded, trying to process what had just happened. She had not only held her own against experienced competitors, but had actually outshot most of them. The confidence that had been building over months of practice was finally showing itself when it mattered most. Frank appeared at her side, having driven down to watch the competition despite her protests that he didn't need to make the trip. "How do you feel?" he asked simply. "Good," Sarah replied, and she meant it. "Really good." "Don't change anything," Frank advised. "You're shooting exactly like you do in practice. The targets are the same size, the rifles work the same way, and physics doesn't care about the audience." As the second stage began, Sarah noticed that some of the earlier skepticism had been replaced by cautious respect. Competitors were watching her more carefully now, trying to figure out her technique and preparation routine. The 400-yard stage would be shot from a sitting position with a time limit of 12 minutes for 10 shots. The added distance meant that small errors in technique would be and the time pressure would test each competitor's ability to perform under stress. Sarah took her position and began her preparation routine. The target at 400 yards looked impossibly small through her scope, but Frank had prepared her for this distance. She made the necessary adjustments for the longer range and settled into her shooting position. The wind had picked up since the first stage, and Sarah could see flags along the range showing variable conditions. This was where all of Frank's teaching about reading wind and making quick adjustments would be put to the test. "Second relay stage 2, begin firing," came the command. Sarah's first shot felt perfect, but when she looked through her scope, she saw it had hit low and left in the 8 ring. The wind had pushed it off target despite her adjustment. She quickly analyzed the conditions and made a larger correction for her second shot. This one hit in the 9 ring, much closer to center. Sarah was learning to read the specific wind patterns of this range in real time. Her next 3 shots formed a tight group in the 10 ring as she found the right combination of adjustments for the conditions. The time pressure that should have been stressful was actually helping her shoot more instinctively, trusting her preparation rather than overthinking each shot. With 5 minutes left and 5 shots remaining, Sarah was shooting faster than she ever had in practice, but her accuracy was holding. Each shot landed in the 9 or 10 ring as she adapted to the changing wind conditions. Her final shot was her best of the stage, hitting dead center in the X ring, despite a strong gust of wind just as she fired. She had trusted her read of the conditions and made an aggressive correction that paid off perfectly. When the scores were announced, Sarah had shot a 94, losing only 6 points over 10 shots at 400 yards. It was good enough for first place in the stage, ahead of Tors, who had struggled with the wind and shot an 89. The crowd's reaction was noticeably different this time. Instead of surprised murmurs, there was genuine applause. Word was spreading that an unknown civilian shooter was leading the competition going into the final stage. But the 600-yard stage would be the ultimate test. At that distance, even perfect technique could be undone by a momentary lapse in concentration or an unexpected wind shift. Sarah had never shot competitively at 600 yards, and she knew that her inexperience at that range could finally catch up with her. The final stage would determine whether her performance so far was the beginning of something special or just an impressive fluke that would be remembered as a near miss. Either way, Sarah knew she had already proven something important to herself and everyone watching. The girl who had been mocked for missing targets at 50 yards was now leading a field of Marines and professional shooters. The hardest test was still ahead. The break between the second and third stages felt both too long and too short. Sarah sat in the competitor area, trying to stay relaxed while processing the reality that she was leading the competition. Around her, Marines and police officers were analyzing their performance and making equipment adjustments, their professional calm contrasting with the butterflies in her stomach. Staff Sergeant Tors approached her with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Ma'am, I've been shooting competitively for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone adapt to conditions as quickly as you did on that 400-yard stage. That last shot in particular was masterful." "Thank you," Sarah replied, still somewhat stunned by the compliment. "I got lucky with the wind read." Tors shook his head. "That wasn't luck. You made a perfect correction and trusted it completely. That takes real skill and confidence." As Tors walked away, Sarah noticed that the other competitors were looking at her differently now. The condescending smiles and dismissive comments had been replaced by the careful attention that serious competitors pay to a genuine threat. She was no longer the amateur who might embarrass herself. She was the person they needed to beat. Frank found her during the break and sat down beside her without saying anything. His presence was calming, reminding Sarah of all the quiet hours they had spent together at the range, building the skills that were now paying off under pressure. "How are you feeling about 600 yards?" he finally asked. "Honestly, nervous," Sarah admitted. "I've never shot that distance in competition, and I know it's where experience really shows." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "The distance itself isn't the challenge. You've got the technical skills to make those shots. The challenge is trusting yourself when everyone expects the newcomer to finally crack under pressure." "What if they're right? What if I've just been lucky so far?" "Sarah, look at me," Frank said, his voice gentle but firm. "Luck doesn't shoot a 96 and a 94 back-to-back under pressure. Luck doesn't adapt to changing wind conditions in real time. Luck doesn't outshoot Marines who have been training for years. What you've done today is the result of all those hours of practice and the mental discipline you've developed. Doctor appeared at Sarah's shoulder. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I wanted to tell you that your shooting today reminds me of the best Olympic competitors I've worked with. You have something that can't be taught." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "The ability to perform better under pressure rather than worse. Most shooters, even very good ones, lose a few points when the stakes are high. You seem to gain focus. That's extremely rare." Arrived with updates from the spotters who had been watching wind conditions at the 600-yard line. "It's tricky out there," he reported. "The wind is switching back and forth between 7 and 12 miles per hour, and it's coming from different angles. The first relay struggled with it pretty badly." Sarah had watched the first relay shoot the 600-yard stage and had been sobered by what she saw. Several shooters who had been strong at shorter distances had struggled significantly. The wind patterns at 600 yards were complex, with different conditions at various points along the bullet's flight path. Even small errors in reading the wind could result in shots that missed the target entirely. The Marine who had led after the first stage had shot only an 81 at 600 yards, his score hurt by several shots that drifted wide in the changing wind. Other experienced competitors had fared even worse, with some scoring in the 70s. "The good news," Frank said, "is that everyone is struggling with the conditions. The winner won't necessarily be the person who shoots perfectly. It'll be the person who makes the fewest mistakes and recovers quickest from bad shots." As the time approached for the final stage, Sarah went through her equipment one more time. She checked her scope settings, her ammunition, and ran through the wind-reading techniques Frank had taught her. At 600 yards, a small error in estimating wind speed or direction could mean the difference between a 10-ring hit and a complete miss. "Third relay, take your positions for the final stage," the range master announced. Sarah gathered her equipment and walked to the firing line for the last time. The 600-yard targets looked impossibly small through her scope, black dots against the white target frames. At this distance, the 10-ring was only about 6 inches in diameter, and with the wind conditions, hitting it consistently would require every bit of skill she had developed. The competitor beside her was Dave Harrison from the gun club, the same man who had suggested earlier that she was in over her head. His expression was serious now, all traces of his earlier condescension gone. Sarah's performance had earned his respect, even if he wasn't happy about it. "Quite a shooting exhibition so far," he said as he set up his equipment. "I have to admit I didn't see this coming." "Thank you," Sarah replied, focusing on her own preparation. "That 600-yard stage is where experience really shows, though," Dave continued, unable to resist one last attempt at psychological warfare. "The wind out there will humble anybody who doesn't have years of practice reading conditions." Sarah ignored the comment and continued her pre-shot routine. She had learned to tune out distractions, and Dave's attempt to rattle her confidence barely registered. Her world had narrowed to the fundamental elements of marksmanship: position, sight alignment, breathing, and trigger control. "Third relay, you have 15 minutes for preparation and sighting shots," came the announcement. Sarah adjusted her rifle for the 600-yard distance and fired her first sighting shot. It hit low and right, about 4 inches from center. She made corrections to her scope and fired again. This shot was closer, hitting just outside the 10-ring. The wind was tricky, shifting in both speed and direction. Sarah fired one more sighting shot, making a larger adjustment for the wind. This one hit in the 9-ring, close enough to center that she felt confident in her settings. Around her, other competitors were struggling with the conditions. She could hear muttered frustrations and see shooters making repeated scope adjustments as they tried to find the right combination of settings for the challenging range. "Third relay, begin the final stage of fire. You have 20 minutes to complete 10 shots for record." Sarah settled into her shooting position and began her breathing routine. The pressure was enormous. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting to see if the unknown competitor could maintain her performance at the most challenging distance. Her first shot felt good as it left the rifle. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact in the 9-ring, slightly right of center. It was a solid start, but not perfect. She made a small adjustment for wind and prepared for her second shot. The second shot hit in the 10 ring, close to the X ring that marked perfect center. Sarah felt the familiar calm settling over her as she found her rhythm. The noise from the spectators faded away, and her world contracted to the crosshairs and the target. Her third shot was perfect, hitting dead center in the X-ring despite a gust of wind that she had read correctly and compensated for. The shot drew an audible reaction from the spotters, and Sarah heard someone comment over the loudspeaker about exceptional wind reading. By her fifth shot, Sarah was in a zone unlike anything she had experienced before. Each shot felt inevitable, the result of perfect technique rather than conscious effort. She was shooting instinctively, trusting the skills that months of practice had made automatic. Her sixth shot hit the X-ring again, followed by 2 more 10-ring hits that formed a tight group near center. With 3 shots remaining, Sarah was on pace to shoot the best score of the day at 600 yards. The wind suddenly shifted, and Sarah could see the flags along the range changing direction. This was the moment Frank had prepared her for, when conditions changed mid-string, and she had to adapt quickly without losing confidence. Her 8th shot, fired with the original wind correction, hit in the H ring as the changed conditions pushed it left. Instead of panicking, Sarah calmly analyzed the new wind pattern and made an aggressive correction for her 9th shot. The 9th shot hit the X-ring perfectly, proving that her wind read was correct. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she prepared for her final shot. One more good shot would give her an exceptional score at 600 yards. As she settled into position for her last shot, Sarah was aware that the entire range had gone quiet. Even other competitors had stopped shooting to watch her final attempt. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead, Sarah felt the same focused calm that had carried her through the entire competition. Her final shot was the best of the stage, hitting dead center in the X-ring with surgical precision. The crowd erupted in applause as spotters confirmed the hit, and Sarah knew, without seeing the official score, that she had shot something special. When the targets were scored and the results announced, Sarah had shot a 97 out of 100 at 600 yards, losing only 3 points over 10 shots in challenging wind conditions. It was the highest score of the day at that distance, and combined with her earlier stages, it gave her the overall championship with a total score of 287 out of 300. The silence that followed the announcement was broken by sustained applause from the crowd. Marines, police officers, and civilian competitors alike recognized that they had witnessed something remarkable. A complete unknown had entered her first competition and defeated a field of experienced shooters with a performance that would have been impressive for a seasoned veteran. Dave Harrison was the first competitor to approach her, his hand extended in congratulation. "That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "I owe you an apology for this morning. You've earned every bit of respect you're going to get." Other competitors followed, offering congratulations and asking about her training background. The Marines were particularly impressed, with several commenting that her performance would have been outstanding even by military standards. Staff Sergeant Torres found her during the awards ceremony. "Ma'am, I don't know if you've ever considered it, but the Marine Corps could use shooters like you. What you did today was exceptional by any standard." Beamed with pride as he watched his sister accept the championship trophy. "I always knew she had something special," he told anyone who would listen. "She just needed the chance to show it." Frank's satisfaction was quieter but deeper. He had recognized Sarah's potential when others saw only failure, and had provided the guidance she needed to develop her natural abilities. Watching her succeed at the highest level was the fulfillment of everything he had hoped for when he first offered to help. Doctor approached Sarah after the ceremony with an unexpected proposition. "I coach the university shooting team, and we could use someone with your abilities. Have you ever considered competitive shooting as more than a hobby?" The transformation was complete. Sarah had entered the range months ago as a complete beginner who couldn't hit a target at 50 yards. Today, she had outshot Marines and police officers at distances up to 600 yards, winning a major competition in her first attempt. But more than the technical skills, Sarah had discovered something about herself that went far beyond shooting. She had learned that she possessed the mental toughness and competitive drive to excel under pressure. The shy insurance adjuster who had been intimidated by condescending comments at the local gun range had become a champion who thrived when the stakes were highest. The drive home was surreal. Sarah's trophy sat in the passenger seat, physical proof of what still seemed impossible. She thought about all the people who had doubted her abilities, who had suggested she try something easier, who had assumed she would fail when the pressure mounted. But she also thought about Frank, who had seen potential where others saw weakness. About who had encouraged her to compete despite her fears. About Doctor, who had recognized that sometimes the most unlikely person can rise to meet extraordinary challenges. Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages from friends and family who had heard about her victory. The local newspaper wanted to interview her. The gun club where she practiced wanted to sponsor her for future competitions. Opportunities that would have seemed impossible just hours ago were suddenly opening up. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from Joe at the shooting range where she had started her journey. "Heard about your win today," he wrote. "I owe you an apology and a lot of respect. Congratulations, champion." As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she realized that winning the competition was just the beginning. She had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed and developed a passion that would shape the rest of her life. The girl who had been mocked for her rifle skills had become the person everyone else wanted to beat. The journey from complete beginner to champion had taken less than a year, but it had changed everything about how Sarah saw herself and what she believed she could accomplish. She had learned that determination and proper training could overcome any disadvantage, and that sometimes the people who seem least likely to succeed are the ones who surprise everyone the most. The range would never be the same place for her. Instead of a source of intimidation and self-doubt, it had become the place where she had discovered her true potential. And tomorrow, she would be back there, preparing for the next challenge, ready to prove that her championship performance was just the beginning of what she could accomplish. Sarah had silenced every critic and exceeded every expectation, including her own. She had transformed from the person everyone mocked into the person everyone wanted to beat, and in doing so, had proven that the most powerful weapon in any competition is the refusal to accept other people's limitations on your potential. The championship was hers, but more importantly, she had won something that no one could ever take away: the knowledge that she was capable of far more than anyone had imagined, including herself.